Hello everyone, today we'll be responding to let's try it again. Hello everyone, today we'll be responding to Andrew Gold talking to Peter Tatchell. I want to get through a good amount of this and I don't know how well I'm going to be able to do it that. Currently, I'm half an hour through. It's rounding up an hour and a half, but I kind of want to do it in two parts, which means I'd have to be twice as efficient in dealing with it this time as I was last time. I'm going to try and make sure that I manage to keep it at 1.1 speed, because they definitely speak at a speed where I can play it at 1.1. But yeah, last time there were adverts and then that made it go down. But alright, everyone, we're going to jump. So if I play at 1.1 speed, that means that after 60 minutes, I'll have saved 6 minutes, which is not an insignificant amount of time to save. Basically, I just have to spend 54... Okay, now this is making it sound unreasonable. I have to spend 54 minutes watching it. And only... Okay, whatever, we'll just try this.
We all have identities.
I don't have one.
Of course you do. You're dressing like a man. You're not wearing a woman's clothing. You're dressing in a deliberately male way.
Yeah, so somebody actually pointed this out in the last video, and I said I didn't notice it, but to be fair, I guess it was like literally right at the end, because obviously this is just when it's defaulted to, because it always like goes back slightly before where I was watching it. Someone pointed this out. Earlier on, he said like, oh, identities aren't about, gender presentation and things like that. But now when he's giving an example of the fact that Andrew has an identity, he's immediately going to how he's dressing, the way he's presenting himself. So they are so inconsistent on this point. They're all over the place.
You're dressing in a typical male way because you identify as a man.
Why? Why is he's like... Yeah, I think I already said this yet. They're both stupid. Look, Andrew Gold, I'm not calling Andrew Gold stupid, to be fair. I suppose the word I should use is wrong, because, look, we all have identities. I identify as a whole slew of things. I identify as a man. I identify as, I could list it off, right? White, British, English, a Leo. I identify as a Leo. I may care more or less about some of those things than others. I'm not really into horoscopes or whatever it's called, astrology. But those are all identities. So Andrew Gold's wrong. We have many identities. Everyone has an identity. But Peter Tatchell's wrong in that he's trying to evidence this by saying about the way we present ourselves. Like, if I identify as a Leo, that doesn't necessarily mean I have to do anything. I don't know how Leos are supposed to be, but I might behave in a particularly Leo way. But because I'm not brain dead, I don't actually believe in astrology, so I don't actually let it impact my life at all. But I would identify as a Leo because I know that a Leo is simply a word to describe somebody who was born at a specific time of the year, and I was born at that time of the year. So if somebody said, oh, what's your star sign? I wouldn't be like, oh, I don't have one. I'd be like, I'm a Leo. So I would identify as one, but that doesn't impact my behavior at all.
What would have to happen to it? How would it be different? Would it just be I like dressing as a woman?
Yeah. Oh, hello, advert. Yeah, that's a good question to ask her. Like, what is it? So you've established, okay, I'm a man, and you've just related that to the way I'm dressing. So what are you saying now would make me a woman? I think that's a good question to ask. Like, what makes a man a woman, according to these people?
Identity is a very complex thing, and it's multivariate, multi-layered. I'm sure...
Oh, he wasn't like that earlier. I was like, oh no, look, the fact you're dressing this way proves that you identify as a man. I was like, oh, it's complicated, it's multi-layered. I hate these people.
A gay identity, someone from a working class background.
He's so good at not responding to things.
Now, I went to Pride in Berlin and I was excited to go and found people just giving one another blowjobs in the street.
I went to a nudist beach in Canada, and I assumed, it's just going to be a nudist beach. I'm not exactly interested in nudism, but I kind of... Does it make me sound like some kind of voyeur if I just say I thought it would be fun just to go and be like, oh, let's check out this nudist beach. I just wanted to see, I've never been to a nudist beach before. I'm not ashamed to admit I'm fond of new experiences. But the new experience I got was maybe a slightly more novel than I was anticipating, because it was not really a nudist beach so much as it was a very explicitly gay nudist beach. It was exclusively dudes, which, okay, fine, whatever. We were walking through it, no problem. Who cares? This was with my wife, so stuck out like a sore thumb. But then I was like, okay, let's get off the nudist beach. I'm sure I must have told this story before because it is very funny. Let's get off the nudist beach. Let's kind of, cut through the wooded area that adjoins the beach, that is parallel to it, because there's the sea, there's the beach, there's the woods. In order to not have to walk along the beach, where we risk stepping on things, we'd have to get onto the path that was the other side of the wooded area. So we cut through the wooded area. There were so many blowjobs happening in the woods. So I'm not at all surprised to hear Andrew Gold say that he went to Pride and just saw people just blowing each other. It's not surprising.
From what I understand, I don't mean to tell you how to feel, but a lot of gay friends of mine are really offended by this caricature of what it is to be gay, when for them it is this very solemn civil rights. And yes, you can celebrate it.
It's like the Chris Rock black people versus N-words thing.
Well, that might have been. I mean, I was there once and I just happened to see it. It's typical. It was next to me. I get what you're saying. Maybe it's just the German.
To be fair, maybe it's just the Germans. Yeah,
German one.
Maybe.
You know how the Germans can be with their kings and things.
Yeah.
But
they really can be.
I mean, today, thousands of families go to...
Oh God, like, a gay German is so funny, because Germans are already kind of gay. They're like, how's it going, fun? But, like, if I was to imagine, like, a stereotypical, like, gay guy, well, like, I don't know, there could be all sorts, but definitely German would be up there. It's like, I like your, what's it called, bratwurst. Oh.
Those families are not kicking up a fuss. They love it.
Which is bad.
You get to a point where you've reached what is as close to parity as you're going to be able to get. There will always be homophobes and racists and all of these things. And at that point, because we want to have purpose, we feel lost unless we continue. And then things start to go a bit awry. And that is what a lot of people think is happening now with regards to Pride, and particularly with trans, that we're trying to shoehorn something in.
Oh, I don't know about that. I don't... Like, with the trans thing, I would say it's not so much a question of they've achieved equality, so much as it's their vision of equality is, like, illegitimate. Because, for example, with gay, I think maybe you could say, they've achieved just about close to parity, or, like, at least so much so. One of the things that someone told me is that when you're driving and you're slowing down, you're supposed to ease off the brake. Just so you don't have the like, you don't kind of suddenly go stop like that. Big stop. The point is that I feel like you could say the exact same thing with, like, civil rights movements, where it's like, when things are really bad, you should have a big push. But then when things start to get better, you don't necessarily go like, oh, everything's fine now, but you kind of say, all right, I think the best strategy here is to start acting like everything's fine and see if that kind of makes things better. Because, like, so for example, something like the fact that I'm sure being gay is not entirely normalized. All right, that's true. But you know what the best way to normalize it would be? Just to behave like normally. Like, essentially be like, oh, okay, yeah, good, we've achieved everything we want to achieve as gay people, so now we can kind of chill out. Like, that would seem to me to actually be the better strategy. And you'd almost call it a kind of fake it till you make it situation, instead of pushing really hard and making a big deal out of all the ways that you've yet to achieve equality. Now, obviously with the trans issue, I say that's kind of like a different thing, because it's sort of like, I don't really even know what trans equality would look like, because it's a different thing. I mean, it's a bit like saying, for example, religious equality. I mean, it's always good to compare trans identity to a religion, because I suppose, to make an analogy myself as a Christian, there are objectives I have as a Christian, there are goals I have as a Christian, there are things I would like to see changed about society as a Christian, but I wouldn't characterize any of that as Christian equality. I guess, like, that's one of the problems with this kind of woke mindset. Every single thing has to be characterized as a fight for equality, rather than just saying, no, I have my particular point of view, and that's something I'm going to fight for. And that's kind of how I feel about the trans issue. But again, you could apply to like Muslims, for example. Like they have their things they want to fight for, and I don't agree with most of the things they want to fight for, but like that's what they're doing. And yeah, I don't see why we have to say every single political struggle is now about equality. Like, why can't it just be you have things you believe and you want to fight for those things you believe? And that's what I'd say characterizes actually a lot of politics right now, rather than it being about equality.
Well, trans has been around since the beginning of the LGBT plus movement, going right back to the 1890s in Germany. It
was a very different thing in terms of how it was conceived of.
They were there at the Stonewall Uprising in New York in 1969.
It's really interesting. He's not actually responding to like the points that Andrew Gold is making, because Andrew Gold was saying, do you think this is something where they've fought for equality, they've achieved equality, and now they're like pushing too far with it because they are basically, because of the momentum of having achieved equality, now they're going like further with it. And he's saying, well, they've been here since the beginning. You'll notice that's not a response to what Andrew Gold was asking about, right? Which has happened several times. Andrew Gold's asked a question, and I mean, look, even the section there, taking civil rights struggle too far, like that's literally what it's called. We're almost at the end of it. Presumably this is his response. And his response is just say, well, we were here from the beginning. Okay, that's not a response. Like, black people were here literally from the beginning. Obviously, that's not relevant to the question of, like, is black equality, is racial equality at a point now where basically everyone's equal, and any attempt to, like, agitate around race is just pushing things too far. Which, for the record, I'll say now, I think I said this already. I think for the most part, we're at a point in society now where, generally speaking, talking about race all the time is doing more harm than good. And I do think that we're not at racial equality. I'm sure there are things that can be done to improve the situation in terms of the difference between races. But the best way to do that would be subtlety and just normalizing the idea of different races being together and things like that. So yeah, I would actually say in that situation, not necessarily that they've achieved equality and now they're going too far, but they're really close to equality. They're closer to equality than they've been since kind of like racial politics became a thing. And with that said, it's probably good that people ease off, and that's why the majority of black people in the UK aren't interested in this racial agitation, and a lot of the people who are pushing racial agitation are actually like white woke university students, which is, you know, a sentiment I've expressed before, and I stand by it.
When the battle cry of the women's liberation movement was biology is not destiny, now some feminists seem to be saying biology is destiny.
They've changed.
Yeah, so it's not destiny. Okay, what's Andrew Gold going to say?
They've changed.
Right, you're right to point that out.
Yeah.
No. The thing is this, okay? What I'd say is this. Biology is not destiny because identity is not destiny. Because biology is identity, right? So it's the same. I mean, again, like you can always make the race analogy, right? Race is a biological category. Yes, I realize there's socio-cultural aspects to it as well, but it is ultimately the referent for it is going to be something found in somebody's biology. So, a black person could say, look, my biology is not my destiny. The fact I'm black, that's not my destiny. As a black person, I can do anything. I can make my own destiny. But that I'm black, that I identify as black, that is based on my biology. That's based on my ancestry. That's based on, you know, where my ancestors came from. That's based on my genetics. That's based on my physical features. That identity I have, that's based on my biology. But that I identify as black, that shouldn't be my destiny. So that's how I'd put it. Because yeah, no, I don't think, would any gender critical person say your biology is your destiny? I don't think anyone would affirm that. I would say your biology is often your identity. Then yeah, like I'd say, I'd make a point of stressing, but your identity is often not going to be your destiny. Sometimes it might be, if you identify as, I mean, it kind of gets into the question like what your destiny is. But I was going to say, like, for example, if you imagine like your destiny as being like your purpose, well, let's say you identify as a novelist. Well, maybe your big purpose is to write a novel. In which case, like, that's kind of your destiny. Like, well, you know, this thing that I really care about is writing a novel. Well, in that case, your identity as a novelist is relevant to that. But when we're talking about kind of socially constructed and socially imposed identities placed upon you by reality itself or by society, obviously in the interest of people being free and self-actualized, that shouldn't be your destiny.
No one tells trans people you're in the wrong body, you've got to change. That's
some people do say that.
Found that less than half of 1% had regrets or detransitioned?
I'm just gonna remind everyone my favorite one of my favorite quotes in like gender critical discourse, just because I think it's good, is the Rubble of Empires quote. Let's see if I can get this right. What a regret rate of less than 1% indicates is not that the surgery is working as intended, but that you have created a population uniquely incapable of expressing even normal levels of regret. And that's kind of the thing it always comes down to. Considering the fact that there's so many reasons why you would think these people would want to regret what they're doing, considering the fact that you look at things like Tavistock, where you have kids literally saying, oh, my parents want this surgery more than I do, or saying, actually, I thought I was a lesbian, but my parents started introducing the idea that maybe I was a boy, and things like that we have so many examples of people expressing this concern. You would think you'd have more people, and of course, when you look at other surgeries, as trans activists are fond of saying, the regret rate for knee replacement surgery is higher than for transition, medical transition. Well, if even just like regular surgeries are having people saying that they regret it, you would anticipate people who get this surgery to also express some level of regret. And the fact that so few of them are, that's actually a cause for suspicion more than it's a cause to be like, oh, there's no problem at all.
A Dutch study of nearly 7,000 trans people over a 40-year period also found that less than half of 1% of...
Also, note here saying over a 40-year period. Here's the problem, right? So if it's over a 40-year period, that's going back to when trans identity was a much smaller thing. There was much more focus on how he got to that position. It wasn't something that someone would just read about on Tumblr and be like, oh, I guess I'm trans too. Absolutely, yeah. I would imagine that we would have quite a low regret rate for people who transitioned 40 years ago, when it was a legal fiction and kind of medical accommodation for a unique group of biological males who were basically had probably tried all sorts of things because there was lots of safeguards, and they had to clear all of these hurdles. And then it was like, okay, it seems like the only way to make you feel happy in your own body is going to be to do this medical thing. Yeah, I can imagine that those people would have quite a low regret rate because there was this substantial vetting process in advance of that. Whereas obviously nowadays, there's much less of that. People are getting this surgery done much younger, and they're getting it done for all sorts of different reasons, and they're more likely to have heard of this surgery, and therefore their decision to identify as trans is going to be much more on a whim compared to how it used to be. And of course, what it means to be trans can be much broader now.
When they tried to go back and say they regretted it, they were pushed away. Which was the opposite of how when they first came along and said they were struggling with their mental health, they were very much brought in and said, hey, maybe you want to change and all those things. When they want to change back, it's not so easy.
Okay. That's like a good point. And like people have pointed out before, there is a huge support network for trans people. There is an entire aspect of the kind of medical industrial complex that is designed to accommodate trans people, and there is obviously this big social movement around it, whereas there is no such thing for detransitioners, which not only makes detransitioning much less appealing, and not only does it make it much more likely that somebody will detransition and then go back to being trans, which is something that happens. People, detransition and then they go back into being trans because of being depressed and losing that support network. But it also makes it likely, as he says, that people might detransition and then not be able to communicate that and kind of just go off the grid because there is nothing to take care of these detransitioning people.
Ideologically, if you know you're a doctor who's just cut off the genitals of a boy, it's going to be very hard for you to say to yourself, shit, I shouldn't have done that.
Well, no.
Yeah, what's that called? Sunk cost fallacy.
The average waiting time for a first appointment at a gender identity clinic is over 5 years.
Which again, that's one of those things where they say it, but it's well, that can't make sense because we know there are examples of people who've got this surgery or whatever really quickly. We know that.
So no one is rushed into transitioning. That's a complete lie. The opposite.
I wonder with this average thing, because where I live, I'm very blessed. The NHS is actually very well funded and is doing very well for itself. And it's kind of funny because there's a bit of a disconnect. Everyone else is talking about how underfunded the NHS is, and that's terrible, obviously. In my experience, I've not noticed that at all. Like, I'm able to get an appointment as soon as I need one. Whatever kind of tests need doing seem to happen quite quickly. I mean, there's still like a bit of an annoyance, like, and like I know some people who've had stories about the doctor like not being as willing to recommend tests that maybe should be done, but generally speaking, it seems okay. And I'd imagine maybe it's the case that in places like that, places that are doing much better kind of financially, because they're in kind of richer, wealthier areas, are pushing down the average, and it's much easier for trans-identified people to do that. And then in some like very poorer places where the hospitals are just a complete disaster, like maybe that's massively bringing up the average. I'm not sure. I almost wonder, my weird speculation would be that actually in some way there's some people who they express interest in the gender transition stuff, and then they kind of just like get over it and they don't end up really pursuing it, but they're still on the waiting list. But because they're not pursuing it actively at all, they just stay on the waiting list, and they're massively bringing up the time. Like, I'm wondering, like, if I went into a doctor and said, oh, can I get like gender transition, blah, 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 and then I just leave it because, like, whatever, I decide I don't want to actually do it. Especially if we're talking about if I just did this for the sake of whatever. So like I'm not really pursuing it because I'm just like actually happy as myself. And then there's other people who they do it, but then they're really pushing for it. They're like, no, I need this, I need this, I need this. Actually, they end up getting kind of fast tracked and they get to do the whole trans thing quite quickly. But people who have just like casually mentioned it and like they're technically on the waiting list, but they're not really pushing for it, because they don't actually care, get left on it for years, and that pushes it up. I wonder if that's like a possibility, because I could see that being the case. That's like pushing up the average, even while actually for a lot of people they're getting it really early.
What do you say to those who would say that the T is irrelevant to LGB because LGB is about your sexual attraction, whereas T is not?
Well, both.
It's a very good point, or good question.
LGBT people and trans people are gender nonconformists. We don't.
Not necessarily. No, not necessarily. Plenty of trans people are either gender conforming because they conform to what I would consider to be their gender. So if you've got like a biological male, it makes no effort to even look like a woman. But certainly a lot of them, by their own standards, are gender conforming, right? Like ContraPoints is gender conforming. ContraPoints is, according to trans activists, a woman who has long hair, who wears makeup. I mean, let's be honest, like what, like basically in every single sense that it seems like Contra could perform a gender, Contra is performing femininity. Contra is more gender conforming than somebody like me. So yeah, that's just not true to say that they're always gender non-conforming.
Don't follow the traditional.
And if that is the case, then well, what about all the so why not include all the people who are gender non-conforming but aren't trans or lesbian or gay, which I guess maybe is what queer is supposed to include. I don't know, but
I really like the idea that I feel like quite a feminine man in terms of the classical stereotypes, very in touch with my emotions.
Yeah, exactly. Like basically you're kind of like, by having this specific category for people who are gender non-conforming and trying to lump all gender non-conforming people into it, you're creating a question of like, okay, so what am I insofar as I'm gender non-conforming? Oh, I just realized I put on my dressing gown. It's kind of cold. So sometimes I like to wear my dressing gown to keep toasty. I went to get my my smoothie and I put my dressing gown on when I went to do so because it was cold in the kitchen. I'm just going to keep it on. I'm just going to be a cozy dude. Cozy. I don't know. It's covering up my... let's take it off. Come on, I always feel a little bit unprofessional when I'm wearing my dressing gown.
Replacing a personality with identity. And it feels like a step back. It feels like, so I think a lot of gay people might feel...
Yeah, someone asked this recently in my Discord. Why is it that being non-binary is sexist? And the simple way I communicated it, I said, well, think about it this way, right? If you've got a biological female who says, I'm a woman, and I'm going to completely reject the performance of femininity, Well, that is clearly countering sexism because it's countering an expectation that's imposed upon women that women should be a certain way. Well, a woman instead saying, "Oh, I am against, performing this traditional femininity, and I'm not a woman. I'm actually non-binary." That's kind of the opposite to that. So if you've got one thing which is clearly countering sexism, then in the case of non-binary, you have the explicit choice to not counter sexism. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's explicitly reinforcing sexism. I'd say it's implicitly, though, because, again, you are literally taking a moment where you could be countering sexism by acknowledging that you're a woman and saying, I'm a woman and I'm not conforming to traditional ideas about gender. And instead, you're choosing to actually say, I'm not a woman, actually, I'm non-binary. And that, I think quite obviously, implicitly reinforces sexism. Because even though most non-binary people probably wouldn't ever say this on the record, it's pretty clear that in their minds there is some association between the fact they're not conforming to stereotypical femininity and the fact that they do not identify as a woman. I
try and avoid emotional, inflammatory language like TERF or transphobe.
Interesting.
It's not helpful. We need to de-escalate. You may be.
Yeah. Okay. Good. I mean, that's fine. Respectable.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I totally get. I totally agree. Women's safety is really important. Women's equal rights are really important. Unfair advantage. Look,
sorry, I'm kind of pausing at a random point just because it's a little bit like they're kind of all agreeing with each other, they're being far too reasonable, which I find very boring. The one thing I will say, like, I want to make like a video I want to do based on what I've done here. The time when Ash Sakar interviewed Judith Butler, I want to do a video almost like just entirely about Ash Sakar talking to trans activists, because she's spoken to Philosophy Tube and she's spoken to Judith Butler. And one of the things that I pointed out is that Ash Sakar keeps asking them pretty basic, pretty tame, probing questions. And they're completely incapable of responding to it. And I say that because, of course, Ash Sakar, if you don't know, is a big progressive. She's quite a prominent progressive personality in the UK. And she obviously has every reason to support trans activism. I mean, she does support trans activism. She explicitly endorses it. She'd probably say that she considers me transphobic and she wouldn't have any interest in talking to me. And yet, it's very evident from her videos interviewing trans activists that they're not able to provide any satisfying response to even the softball questions she throws at them. And I say that because within that context, it's not surprising these people aren't willing to come on to Andrew Gold's show. Well, obviously they're going to have a much more substantial, or he's going to have much more substantial criticism, even though he's being pretty tame here. But that's the thing. Like trans activism, I can't blame them for not going on these shows and having their ideas challenged, because they can't even talk to people who agree with them without sounding like idiots. So, it's not a good sign.
I don't want to labour that point, but
yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Did you think that maybe Roxy Tickle, particularly Roxy Tickle, who seems to have a porn star name, which doesn't do much. I mean, it must be very frustrating for a lot of trans people who...
It must be very frustrating for people who have porn star names.
Just want to live a life.
Yeah.
Like, imagine if, I've made that joke before of like calling a kid like Chastity or Crystal or something like that, like a name that's like, obviously thought of. I mean, I would use the word stripper or like, stripper name, because that's what I think of it as. Does anyone ever like think about the fact that a lot of porn stars just have like normal names? Like, I always find that kind of funny. Like, I'm not gonna, I don't know, like who's like a famous oh god, who's that one really famous one? I mean, well, there was like obviously Emily Willis was the one who overdosed and is possibly still in a coma, which is obviously very sad. But like Emily Willis, that's a normal name, but it's a porn star name. I don't know, what am I saying here? I'm just saying, like, for the record, there's like this idea that all porn stars have like these really often, like, what's the word, kind of like pun names, like obviously Ben Dover, like, which I don't even know if that's a real person. I've just heard of that as a porn star name, like Mr. Dover, first name Ben. But like in reality, none of them are ever like that. They're always just like normal names, which is kind of surprising. But yeah, having said that, if you did have a name that sounded like, you know, a stage name, that would be very awkward for you.
Well, in some cases, but there was also Leah Thomas as an example, who's now being accused of deliberately brushing past people with his penis in the women's toilets. Some of the people.
Yeah, that's it. Like, I guess like it's gonna have to be with the trans toilet thing. People who are interested in doing it in like a subtle way where they have plausible deniability, and obviously having, you know, a trans inclusive toilet policy is going to allow people to do that kind of subtle violation where they have plausible deniability. But I mean, the other issue is it's just a way to make people uncomfortable. I mean, there was a story recently about like it was on Twitter, a guy who went into a woman's toilets and then was like, oh, I identify as a woman, even though he'd like looked like a man. I've seen that a few times. The thing about it is, in a way, like obviously there were gender critical women complaining about it, but at the same time, you know, I kind of relate to, I guess, what Callie J. Keane was saying about, hey, you know, men need to start telling people at like schools and stuff like that they're going to ask where the women's toilet is so they can go use the women's toilets in order to make people realize how bad these trans inclusive policies are. It's kind of a similar thing here, where in a way I'm like, if I see some like dude bro who's like barged into women's toilets, be like, oh, I identify as a woman, so what are you going to do about it? You know, I'm a woman, so you just got to accept that. Like actually by doing that, they're kind of the real MVPs, because, well, according to trans activism, that's fine. So that should make people realize trans activism is a problem.
That is not representative of the bulk of the Muslim population. They are not terrorists, and they should not be penalized.
Of course they're not.
Yeah.
But a large percentage of grooming gang incidents do.
So yeah, basically what Andrew Gold's saying here is it's kind of saying this as like an aside in a way, because he's basically there's like two questions here. Like, one, should you change policies just because of a minority? And then what he's saying is, well, whether or not you should change policies, you know, we should at least have a discussion around, you know, a particular issue. If there is a preponderance, a disproportionate number of people in a particular group doing a particular thing, we need to have a conversation about why is there that disproportionate number, which is a legitimate point to be making, and I would agree with him. But then there's the other question of like, well, you know, should we have a blanket ban on something? And you know, look, I've spoken about the women's bathroom issue before. Like, my main focus on it would be not so much about preventing instances of violence or violation, so much as it would just be on, you know, making it clear these are women's toilets, and as such, as I've always said, whenever a biological male enters a women's toilet, that is an act that basically violates them. And I think I said recently in a video, and I do stand by this, I think especially when you talk about like so-called trans men who actually look like men, I don't think we can have an absolutely perfect sex segregation rule, because there are going to be some trans-identified individuals who, because of the surgery they've had and because of, you know, obviously some like natural features, like if, you know, you're a woman and you tend to be a lot taller and then you get testosterone, well, you're probably going to look a lot like a man. If you're a man and you are a lot shorter than average, then you're probably and then you take loads of estrogen, you're probably going to look more like a woman. And within that very, very tiny area, I think there's some leeway where you'd say, actually, let's be honest, it would probably be more ridiculous if this person used used what corresponds to their biological sex. And in the case of trans-identified females, it would actually make women more uncomfortable to have let's say there's a 6-foot woman, and there are 6-foot women who takes testosterone, and also let's say she goes to the gym, she gets pretty buff. So you've got a 6-foot guy with a beard, deep voice. Oh, sorry, I say guy. A guy as it would appear to you, of course, in reality, no matter how much this person looks like a guy, that's not what makes somebody a man. But, you know, obviously, I don't really regret or feel like it's too embarrassing for me to have accidentally said guy there, because obviously this person would look like a guy to the average woman. So, and, you know, I know people say, oh, well, you know, the hands would be different and the pelvis shape would be different. So, you know, this woman would walk differently. I think I think you're. I don't buy this idea that most people would actually realize that. I think most people would just think, okay, this is a 6 foot person who's got a beard and a deep voice and is like kind of muscly. This just appears to me to be a man entering the women's toilets, and that would make women uncomfortable. So I think there's a little bit of leeway, but we're talking about a tiny fraction of the time, and the main focus should just be on the fact, well, most of the time women are going to realize that a biological male is using their spaces, and that's going to make them feel violated, and that's the, I think, big issue.
The police should not look the other way. Most, well, Muslim people on what a tiny minority might do in terms of acts of terrorism. So I'm saying,
you know what, I'm actually going to skip the women's toilet bit because I want to make more progress here, and like I don't care about, like I just feel like it's such a played out discussion, and I'm not saying it's not serious. I'm just saying, like, you know, I mean, I always go back to the fact the perfect solution is to have individual cubicles for everyone. Then all this stuff just goes out the window, which I know that's not always going to be, you know, like I said that one time, I was like, oh, so you're saying, or like say everyone, there was a person in my comments like, oh, so you're saying that every single establishment should be forced to completely renovate their toilets. How are you planning on providing the billions of pounds that it would take for every single person? No, I'm just saying, like, where possible, if you know, you can make it so every single cubicle has complete privacy, that's obviously the best thing to do. If you can't do that, okay, that's fine. But, you know, it's just like that is the best solution. All other factors, you know, not in consideration.
there'd be uproar. They could get beaten up. They could get more likely to be assaulted and raped.
Well, we don't know that exactly. And that,
Well,
again,
Yeah, like, I mean, that's the thing. Like, obviously, there is a balance, which is why, like, I'm not. I think people who are who say, like, well, obviously, the solution that's like perfectly fine for everyone is if every single biological male goes into the men's toilets, every single biological female goes into women's toilets, and everyone would be like that would never lead to any problems and blah blah blah. I think those people are being intentionally obtuse, obviously, and I mean, like, especially with something like prisons. Like, I do not think. And to be fair, I think most people would agree with this. Like any kind of gender non-conforming, trans identified or not, gender non-conforming man should not be put in the general population of a male prison, because, you know, obviously what happens in male prisons, it's not good at all. But I think we can all imagine that men who are presenting in a very feminine way are likely to be the biggest victims of that. So obviously, no, yeah, there is a serious danger there.
Don't make a fuss about trans men going into women's toilets, because that's the logical conclusion. If you
Yeah, okay, look, I literally already covered this. I covered this preemptively. Yes, I think that if you're talking about like a trans man, so-called, who's really, really convincing, and lots are not. I mean, like, even just someone like, again, and I do realize, like, oh, if you see them in person and like they're shorter and, you know, obviously, you know, someone I was talking to was like talking about gait. Which is like, I don't know if you know, it's like some people don't know what gait is, I guess. Like the way someone walks, just in case, you know, because maybe some people aren't obsessed with people's walking patterns. But yeah, someone was saying like, oh, just based on their gait, because of, you know, like the way the pelvis and the hip is organized, you can immediately tell whether someone's biologically female or biologically male. I don't buy it. I don't buy the idea that the average, because like the average person is, I would not say the average person is analytically minded. I don't buy this idea that the average person is going to immediately see a bearded person walking around with a, you know, deep voice and whatever else and be like, oh, that's obviously a woman. I'm completely comfortable immediately recognizing that person as a woman because based on their gait, I can tell the structure of their pelvis and the way that their like hip socket is, you know, orchestrated. I don't buy it. I cannot believe that's actually true of anyone. So with that said, yeah, of course, that's going to be something where I think you do need special accommodation. And in my video where I kind of said like what actual policies would I support, I think I would support a thing where there are some people, post-operative transsexuals, not all of them, but some of them, if the operation or whatever they've gone through, especially something like testosterone, because testosterone is so powerful, could get a license which basically says, you know, you are still a woman. Let's say we're talking about a trans-identified female. You're still a woman. because you're biologically female, but because you look sufficiently like a man that it would probably make women uncomfortable if you use women's spaces, this license allows you to ignore the rule that says only biological females are allowed in biological female spaces and only biological males are allowed in biological male spaces. So you would have a general rule that says that has legally defined sex segregation. So we could say if a man just walks into a woman's toilets, that is against the rules. But then you have this extra license, this extra accommodation for some people where, like Peter Tatchell is getting at here, I think I said Tatchell. Peter Tatchell is getting at here. If it would, like, in these unique cases, cause a lot of confusion or even anxiety because this person does not look like a typical woman, then they get a special, like I say, license that says, no, obviously you're allowed to, use the man's toilets because that's probably going to make fewer people uncomfortable.
Go into a woman's toilet, they're much more likely to waylay a woman late at night in a lonely alleyway or something.
We don't.
I mean, if you want to be really, if you want to say the real thing that we need to say, most sexual assault doesn't happen in like an alleyway or something like that. It happens in a bedroom and is perpetrated by somebody who the woman knows. That's the situation, so you got to watch out. But still, like, what's the word? You want to carry a... Okay, slight question. People say, oh, like rape whistles. Oh, rape whistles, very important. Everyone needs a rape whistle if you're a woman. I'm not going to lie. If I was walking around and I heard a whistle, maybe I would actually. Like in my head, I guess like, so I suppose my first instinct if I heard a whistle would just be to be like, what the hell is that? Like I would just be confused. I think to be fair, if I heard like an intense whistling, like repeated whistling, like shh, shh, shh. I can't whistle. To be fair, I wasn't even trying to whistle there. Like I was just like, because I don't want to whistle because I feel like it would make an annoying noise into this thing. But even if I was trying to whistle, it wouldn't sound okay. Let me actually. This is an attempt to whistle. Shh, 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 shh. Like it's just it's slightly. You can tell there's the semblance of a whistle there. Yeah, if I heard that, I'd probably be like, oh wait, okay. Rape whistle, like, but I'd only do that because like I'm familiar with the concept of a rape whistle. But yeah, I feel like I'm not the only person who, if I just randomly heard whistling as I was like walking around, my first thought would be like, why is someone whistling? It would take me a second to process. Oh yeah, but it's just kind of, I don't know, to me it's kind of funny because it's just like this idea, like I guess like somebody invented the concept of a rape whistle and I think they just took it on faith that everyone would be like, because there was no rule, like no one had a meeting where they said, all right, everyone, if we hear a whistle, that means there's a rape happening. Like someone just came up with that themselves, and then, well, I guess now it's a thing because now most people have heard of rape whistles. So, yeah, I guess if you do hear a whistle, you got to do something about it. I realize probably like its main function is that it would scare off the rapist on the like, because they would be like, oh, someone's probably going to come. Like I imagine it's less the case of you blow the whistle, the rapist hangs around until someone shows up and accosts them. I imagine it's more a case of you blow the whistle, the rapist runs away. But anyway, like I say, most of the time, it's actually happening in a very different situation where, it's like not a dark alleyway.
No, we don't know that.
Well, we do know because the number of assaults on women.
No, yeah, I mean, look, I will say this. I 100% actually am of the opinion that I do struggle with the idea that a woman's bathroom is an especially likely place for a woman to be sexually assaulted because, again, women's bathrooms are frequented quite regularly. I don't think that rape, sexual assault, usually I use the word sexual assault because it feels like it's a bit like that George Carlin thing about how like if you make a word kind of slightly longer, you kind of rob it of its discomfort. And I can imagine for some people, like, the bluntness of the word rape is much more intense. Whereas I feel like if I say sexual assault, I'm kind of cushioning the blow. So that's why I use the word sexual assault. Yeah, I don't think that's actually that likely to be the consequence of a biological male entering a woman's toilet. It's definitely a consequence of prisons. I think prisons are much more likely to be, because we know that's happening in prisons all the time. On the other hand, I don't think in general sexual assault happens much in toilets. So for me, I tend to just talk about the fact that it's about a more broad idea of violating women's boundaries. Because, yeah, like obviously if a biological male is using a women's toilets and the women there are aware as a biological male, that might make women uncomfortable, and that's a problem, and that's something which I think justifies not allowing that. But it's always going to be rare that it's actually going to result in any kind of genuine sexual assault, because, yeah, like Peter Tatchell saying, if that was your strategy, if your goal was that, you would come up with a different way of doing it, because, like, you know, there's so many other more viable, like, you can just roofie someone. I mean, you can't, that's illegal, don't do it, guys. But the point is, like, so many other ways other than going into a woman's toilet on the off chance that there be a woman there, but not enough women, not so many women that, you know, obviously you would pretty much immediately get caught. It just doesn't really make much sense.
But it's not just about safety, is it? It's about one of the things that I was saying before was a key aspect of the civil rights movement, which was dignity.
Yeah, so that's it. That's where I'm at, right? It's not so much about safety. Safety matters, and I don't want to, like, have people being like, oh, you know, you're completely ignoring the issue of safety. You're completely underplaying the fact there is a safety concern. No, yeah, of course there is. But I feel like most of the time, in terms of what we should really be concerned about, it should be dignity, the sense of having privacy, rather than the actual risk of a genuine assault happening.
I reject this concept. I don't think that a man can be a woman and vice versa. And I think there's an aspect of social contagion here.
I mean, yeah, he pretty much, he kind of did like he was talking about women's toilets, and then he kind of pivoted to just a much broader issue. But yeah, I agree with what you're saying, like, absolutely. Because a lot of trans identity is clearly about people having these mental health issues. To say that makes them a woman, that's obviously very offensive.
You don't think a man can be a woman?
Yes.
What I'm saying is a man can be a trans woman, but not a biological woman.
I don't care. Like, I don't, like, obviously Andrew Gold's going to say, yeah, but, like, they can't be a woman full stop. A trans woman isn't a woman. But it's boring. Like, we already know this, right? We already know that this whole thing is nonsense. Whatever.
But okay, why, if it's not about sex, why are we having things taken off and removed and bodies? That's about your sex, isn't it? It's not what's inside you. And why are we
it's about your gender identity.
Oh God, I can't be bothered. Like, that's the thing, like, it's all just so, like, all over the place. Like, they'll say gender woman, then they'll say sex, then they'll say, like, oh, you know, getting your penis changed isn't about your sex, it's about your gender identity. What does that mean?
The whole purpose of puberty blockers, hormone treatment, and gender reassignment surgery is to align a trans person's gender identity with how they feel. Or to align.
What an idiot. Align their gender identity with how they feel. Those two things are that they mean the same thing, but, like, that's the issue. They always, like, they always just use these terms of, like, oh, it's about gender, it's about sex, it's about expression, blah blah blah. But then the problem is they can never actually say anything concrete, so they end up just saying, like, non-statements like that, like aligning your gender identity with how you feel. That's the same thing. But the problem is he can't say aligning your sex with how you feel, because then he'd be arguing that trans-identified males change sex, and he's made a big point saying, no, that's not what we're saying. We're not saying that. That's the issue. Maybe
their parents don't like the idea that it's a gay boy. I mean, that does happen sometimes.
It is so ridiculous to think that someone is fearful of being gay and therefore they opt to be trans.
This happens
to exchange.
That definitely happens all the time. Like, we literally know, like, there was the Tavistock thing, right? But yeah, it's and like Blair White. There's loads of examples. Obviously, in Iran, that's the thing. Like, gay men can transition, and, like, that's considered okay.
A responsible process would be to assess why they want that and to be certain about what the benefits are going to be.
Yeah, that's what we're doing with trans identity. Anyway, I think we're going to end this now. We're not even, we weren't close to finishing it in 2 parts, but we should be on track to finish it in 3 parts. So there we go. That's that. I will see you all next week. I think I'm going to end right now because honestly, even though we didn't quite even make it half an hour, I still actually went a little bit over how long I wanted to be recording for. So I'll see you all next week. Bye.